Hi, so welcome back to the ITAM Accelerate Process Kit videos. Rory and I have just realised we probably should have done the vendor onboarding process after the software approvals process, because the software approvals process leads into the vendor onboarding process. So we got that one wrong. But anyway.
That minor screw up aside, let's move on to the next video.
Which is the software approvals process. So this is actually, it's a classic case of a software asset management system process which is owned and run by somebody outside software asset management. You do not need to own this process. You do need to contribute to it, and you need to understand the output of it, but you don't own it.
No, absolutely. Just to say, who approves software in the organisation? It may be that nobody does it, and software just appears on the IT estate, and that's the worst of every world. So the nice thing about having this in the kit is that it does give you some structure and rigour and idea as to who to reach out to get approval for software. I think in here we've talked about sort of, certainly we did in the last process video, we talked about networks having input, information security, service management. The software has to be reliable from an InfoSec point of view. Service management have to have the ability to be able to support it in the first place. And networks want to make sure that any software that might be deployed doesn't crash the network or overload the network. So all these things play into giving an overall assessment of software. And I think too, we've modelled a step for end user testing as well, just to make sure that it actually does what it says on the proverbial tin.
Yeah, but as far as ownership of this process goes, who you should be engaging to make sure this process is working properly, in the majority of organisations, it's the enterprise architecture team. So they're effectively the group that are accountable for making sure that all of the technology introduced into an organisation is approved, and because they're the ones that need to make sure it needs to work together and that it meets the business requirements overall. So, but then of course that makes it difficult if you're in an organisation that doesn't have an enterprise architecture group. And when you're in an organisation like that, that sense of who owns this process and who needs to drive it forward can be lost, and it ends up being sat in service management or sometimes even in software asset management. So if you're the person who is trying to get a process like this in place so that you're clear about what software is being introduced and when and why and all the issues around it, then bear in mind that actually if you're doing that, you're not wearing a software asset management hat, you're wearing a different hat. And that means that you're because you're playing a different role really from what a software asset manager would normally play. So it's a very much a role which should be present in organisations. All organisations have to make decisions about what technology is used and making sure that that technology supports the business activities or the organisational value producing activities. But it doesn't necessarily exist in all organisations as a formal group. So I think understanding that nuance is quite important. And the other thing that I see often is that, particularly for relatively risk-free software, so things like reader software or some SaaS, relatively simple, straightforward SaaS software, for instance, the enterprise architecture team or sort of that function will delegate responsibility for approving those relatively risk-free pieces of software, particularly end-user software, to potentially even a software asset management team. So again, bear in mind that that is perhaps what's happening in your organisation. It feels like it either doesn't run well because nobody feels it's important enough to have a formal software approval process for risk-free software, and then you end up trying to manage something that's not, that's a bit of you get a bit of a nightmare because it just hasn't been approved properly and there's no processes around that to do that. But actually, potentially what's happened is the enterprise architecture team have sort of mentally shrugged their shoulders and said, it's not particularly risky, so we're not going to own this process. But actually, somebody needs to. So again, you think of yourself as being delegated the responsibility by enterprise architecture to develop a process that works for some of those relatively simple pieces of software.
And I think the nice point where this really steps in for Sam is that you're potentially using this process as a gatekeeper to your scope. So if titles are being added, ultimately the output of this is that titles get added to the supported software catalogue, and now there's an asterisk against that one I want to talk about in a bit as well. But you need to have some eye on what's coming down the pipeline with regards to what you're managing, and this provides a perfect funnel for doing that then at that point. So it's not that scenario where software just appears on the IT estate and, oh God, you've got to throw your arms around it with the same degree that you would back office software or data center software. So just having an appreciation of what's new coming into the organization, this process acts as a perfect funnel for that. Just specifically on that point that I raised about going through and adding titles to the software approvals process via the software approvals process to the catalogue as well. Do make sure that if titles are rejected, that they are still added to the catalogue, but they're starred as rejected, just so that if somebody in 6 months' time comes along to the organisation that is new and requests that same software, you don't have to put them through the mill of an approvals process again, because you've already assessed the software as being, unfit for purpose. Now, that said, that gives you the ability to then look at versions and additions of software. It could be that the software's gone through an upgrade and maybe another assessment is worthwhile, but that's a quite binary, cursory decision you can make instantly, rather than if you just reject something and don't record that you've rejected it.
Yep. So I think the other big thing that needs to occur in this process is assigning a product owner. So is it in ISO that all assets have to have an owner? I think it probably is. And so this is where you fulfill that condition of ISO 19770, making sure that there is that sense of ownership. Now, of course, ownership can have a number of different aspects. You might have a budget holder, so they're effectively a financial owner. You might have somebody who needs to make the life cycle decisions around the software, so they might be, the technology owner for that particular piece of software. And then, of course, there's the business teams, the people who actually use the software, who need to make decisions about when it's upgraded, additional functionality that they might like, etc. So, they're a business owner. So don't think of owner as being one individual person, because there's different aspects of ownership. And so different, you might have a number of different people exercising those aspects of ownership. But it is really important to make sure that you're clear about who is making the decisions that are required to manage this software in the future. And this is the point at which you identify those individuals or teams.
Yeah.
So this process feeds out to a load of other processes again, specifically the supported software catalogue. At the end of this process, we record the outcome of this process, as Rory said, whether or not the software is being accepted into use or whether it's being rejected. And again, we need to feed out to some of our BAU processes to make sure that they are going to work properly with this new piece of software that we've accepted. So the software request, we need to figure out what's the request procedure, how we buy new entitlement, how we might want to package the software as well if it's an on-premises piece of software. So there's a number of different ones. Thinking about what tooling might be required to support the software properly, etc. So, but particularly we lead out to the vendor onboarding process, because that's where we bring all of this information together.
Yeah, and where this plays to being, shall we say, more responsive to shall we say, the needs and demands of the business and the humans that actually ask for all this software is in that request process, because it offers an exception loop. You might have your catalogue offering a view of the software that an end user can typically request, but if they come up with something new, then this is the process that it feeds out to say yes or no, you can or can't have it. So having that weaved into your request process is quite important.
Yeah, and I would say about backfixing. So this is a software where you might actually, a process where you might actually end up doing a bit of backfixing. You might have software that's been introduced to your estate outside of this process, what we would recommend then is that you run it through this process, and then if the software is rejected, you need to feed out to the software removal process so that you can make sure that you remove the software from the estate. So it's very common for people to just introduce new pieces of software, and it's so easy these days with the ability to just put in some credit card details and suddenly you've got a lovely piece of SaaS software. So when that happens and you identify that that's happened, put the software through this process so that it can be formally approved. It goes into your supported software catalogue, and it gives you the opportunity to say, no, we don't want this software, in which case you feed out to that removal process to get rid of it as well.
Yeah,
that's really
absolutely.
important.
Yeah.
So back fixing this process is something that you would probably do much more often than you would want to.
Yes.
So anything else?
No, that's it. Just I think it's an adieu from me and from you, and also from Susie down here. You might be getting the odd meow on the soundtrack there, but that's a demanding cat. That is my life, unfortunately.
Yes,
so
they're very whiny. My cat's not like that.
No. Fairy rent dodgers. Yeah.
Anyway, we'll see you later.
All right. Take care. Bye bye.